Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Bulletproof for BJJ podcast. And today we will be discussing how to eat to win for BJJ. Now,
Ultimate.
And if you haven't heard us speak before about nutrition, this idea of eating to win is about eating well, optimally getting the most nutrients you can to stay healthy. Because this is actually something that's not discussed a lot in BJJ for whatever reason. People are always doing crash diets, fad things, all the kind of crazy things. And what we want to do for you guys today is actually break it down very simply how we look at food and why we approach it the way we do.
Are we talking, when you say eat to win, are we talking about specifically competition, or are we just talking generally?
No, it's a philosophy, right? Like this is something you post about more as your food flex. Joey is actually he's a closet celebrity chef, most famous chef you never heard of, but he does cook good food, good wholesome, tasty food, and is always hitting up with the hashtag eat to win, and they're good. I get jealous. I see those posts and I'm like, gosh, I wish I could be bothered. No.
That's why I put them out there.
Yeah.
I want people to feel bad.
Feel jealous.
About their inadequacies in the kitchen.
And no. Such a good flex.
But yeah, no, I think to give a bit of context, at least on my thinking of the eat to win movement, which get on board, guys. Eat to win nation, hashtag eat to win lifestyle.
You heard it here first. Joey's cooking show starting very
generally
soon.
It's about understanding food. It's about having a good relationship with it, knowing how to work in the kitchen and making time for that. But then also celebrating sometimes when it's like, I'm going to indulge in, whatever, a takeaway burger or some fucking pizza or whatever floats your boat. But it's not all about steamed chicken and broccoli and rice and all the time. It's about an enjoyment of food and making sure that it's nourishing.
Yeah. I thought where we might start is we might talk about macros, macronutrients. That's what macros is short for. And just break it down really simply, because basically what we're referring to whenever you hear the word macros, don't get too caught up in like a special diet. We're talking about protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And they all have their role and they all have a degree of importance. So if you're not really across this, we're not going to bore you to death, but we want to talk about each piece of the puzzle and then relate that back to what a good meal looks like. How do we get a good portion of each and why that's important?
Yeah, macros is an important one to understand, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's essentially, to give people a basic understanding, because it's a good bit of context for you to understand food. It's about energy.
Yes.
And macros is referring to those 3 macronutrients, which are like 3 simple categories that most foods will fit into. The confusing part when you're new to it is that if you take like a protein source, it is not purely protein.
No.
It does contain elements of carbohydrate and fat in there as well.
Sure.
But we tend to categorize the food by whichever macronutrient is most present.
Most prominent, yeah.
Yeah, so, meats and animal products, often protein sources, grains and pastas and breads and whatever, carbohydrate sources, as well as tubers like underground roots, potatoes and sweet potatoes and shit. And then what's the other one? Fats.
Fats, looking at all kinds of things, because fat can come in the form of meat as well.
Yep.
Or we could be looking at an avocado.
Yep.
Looking at an oil, nuts.
Yep.
There's actually
dairy fat.
So, there's a lot of different options here, and we're not going to be pushing, like a lot of people love to associate their identity with a type of eating. Like, I'm vegan. I'm keto.
The butter guy.
I am the butter guy.
The butter flex guy.
I was watching The Family Guy the other day, and Peter has to have a battle with Quagmire for a cooking show, and Peter's a terrible chef. But then the secret ingredient for their cook-off to see who's going to get the TV spot is butter. Like in Iron Chef, and Peter's like, excellent.
That's French cuisine.
That's basically what it is.
More butter, more salt, delicious.
That's me. I'm basically French. But no, here's the thing, guys. It's interesting because I've been obsessed with food since I was pretty young, since I was like a chubby little kid, and wanting to overcome that. There has been trends, because in the 90s, it was very much low fat. It's like, don't eat fat, it'll make you fat. And there was a bunch of research to show that that's actually not the case. And then there's a bit of a shift there. And we have talked about this before. We don't want to go too hard on running over old ground, but then, there was a stage where carbs is the enemy. No carbs, keto, there's these different...
Keto, paleo.
Yeah, but then sometimes this goes to extreme, so then someone swings back the other way and goes...
Basically whatever Joe Rogan's talking about.
Joe Rogan or whatever, people can profit off, right? Because there's that. Because it's like, oh, don't even eat food, just eat pills and powders. It's more pure. What we want to get you guys on is understanding what certain foods may give you, and if you're lacking, where can we make it healthier? Because that's ultimately what we want. If you want to get better at jiu-jitsu, you want to have good energy, you want to have good fuel, you want to be healthy. If you're sick or your guts are off or you've constipated, all these things, you're not going to do good jiu-jitsu.
No. And you're also generally going to be in bad health, and that's going to affect everything else, isn't it?
Exactly. So looking at the different kind of requisite pieces here, obviously, if you're growing up, depending on if you're in the USA or UK, Australia, wherever you might be in the world, you may have had some very basic nutrition in school, like whether it was in high school or primary school, and they do the food pyramid thing, and they say, oh, you got to eat this and this and this, but everyone is quite different. And culturally, your culture might eat more bread, or you might eat more rice, or maybe you don't eat a lot of that. You're eating more meats and vegetables, depending on where you're from in the world. But essentially, we can't get away from the fact, and this is something that I really want to kick us off with, that carbohydrate is the best source of energy. Like, easiest to access, easiest to digest, readily available to turn into blood glucose, which is what's fueling us for training.
Yeah, absolutely true. You can look at the science supports it. A great analogy I heard once was that if you are, if you're knocking on death's door, if you're like critically ill and you're in hospital, the first thing they do is hook you up to glucose.
Yep.
That is fuel for the body. They don't hook you up to fat. No. They don't hook you up to protein.
And you haven't got that protein shake going straight in the IV like,
Yeah. And I heard a biologist talking about this who was very pro-carb, and he's just like, it is the cleanest, burning, most efficient fuel source for the body. Why would you avoid it?
Yes.
But, whatever food beliefs someone might have, jiu-jitsu is a very glycolytic sport, isn't it? Requires a lot of sugar.
Correct.
And so we believe carbohydrates are an extremely important part of any jiu-jitsu player's diet.
Yeah, I think what gets mixed up here is people often look to people who, like jiu-jitsu people look to other industries and other fields of physical expertise, and people might admire a bodybuilder, right? And they're like, man, they just eat protein. They only eat carbs selectively. But the truth is, for a lot of these guys, if they are deep in the bodybuilding world, they're standing on the spot. Or they might squat, but then they're sitting down. Their actual overall energy demand across an hour is very different. Like lifting weights is proven to burn less energy than cardiovascular activity.
But even they pump the carbs, right?
Oh, no, they do, depending on what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think it's the idea that, this whole bulking, cutting, this mindset of performance, and we're talking about eat to win, it's very short term. It's peak.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I look the shredded and big and all this
20 minutes on stage.
And then they're passing out backstage. It's not a great vibe.
I think the great sort of thing about where carbs really got put off was when we had that swing back from, we had the high carb movement through the 80s and 90s.
Yep.
And it was all about victimizing fats. And it's like, don't eat fats, I'll give you heart disease. And then we had this swing back where it was like the pendulum went the other way, where it's like carbohydrates are the enemy. And this is where we saw the paleo movement.
Yep.
And then later on, we saw the keto movement, sort of come in almost as a response to that.
Yep.
And I think that the pendulum just swung back too hard in the other direction. The thing is like, if you're, do you remember the Bulletproof
Coffee.
diet? Bulletproof Coffee, Dave Asprey, that guy?
Sure.
I think he was a bit of a, I think he was talking a lot of shit.
He
was a bit of a grifter, right?
We can see that he was a charlatan.
He was a charlatan. He was selling snake oil.
He was. He taken a small truth and tried to extrapolate that out to something way bigger, which was not true.
Yeah. And I mean, and just an interesting point with him is he didn't train. He didn't do exercise. He stood on like a vibration board for 20 minutes a day or something like that. Some biohacking bullshit.
Not a particularly healthy guy. If you look at Dave Asprey, and not that I'm not trying to punch down here, but look, if he showed up to jiu-jitsu, I would choke him extra hard. You know, he was on Rogan.
Hear that, Dave?
Cop that,
Show
Dave.
up.
But if you look at interviews with him, he doesn't look healthy.
No, he's like a geeky kind of whatever kind of guy. Like he's not, in any case though, he's not the kind of person that a jiu-jitsu person should be taking diet advice from.
Not at all.
So when you think about, well, how did this low carb thing get proliferated? And it was like, well, it's by people like that who don't have any business telling you what you should be doing because you're doing a sport that is like extremely
energy demanding.
Yeah, that's right. It has a lot of physical output. So it's interesting to look back at, what catalyzed these things within our food culture in the West, at least.
Yes.
And then you're like, okay, that's irrelevant for me.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's also, we get this association of like, oh, I want to have abs, or like, I want to be lean. Oh, if I have carbs, I retain water, all these different ideas bubbling around. But the truth is that if you are expending a lot of energy and you're not putting enough fuel back, your general quality of training, learning, anything goes down. This is something that is just not talked about, because you see some of these people out there who look remarkable, like they look so impeccable. You're like, dang, that's a rig. Trying to have a conversation with them, they're a feckin' idiot. Like, you're trying to learn something really complicated, and that's another thing which isn't discussed. We're going to go to fat next as a fuel source. Like, fat is a great fuel source, but it's harder to break down. It takes longer, and it can't cross the blood-brain barrier. So you can't think as clearly. And that idea of people getting dumb as they cut weight is a real thing. So your body has to then go to other fuel sources, and that's really tough. So if you're trying to learn, whether you're at school, you're studying, or you're just doing jiu-jitsu, you need blood glucose for your brain to function optimally. Just a thought. So I want to just kind of step away from carbs for a second and talk about fat, because this is something else that's been, demonized over the years, but now people are coming back around to it. Avocados, so popular, robbing all the young millennials of their house deposits.
That's right. Smash that thing on a piece of sourdough, please, sir.
Bro, that'd be $27.50. At least here in Australia. But no, it's the thing. I like avocado. They're pretty cheap right now. They're in season. But I love butter. I love fats in general. I'm somebody who digests fats quite well, but that's not the same for everyone out there. So some people can't tolerate fatty, rich foods. They just find it indigestible, or they get reflux. There's different things with that. But that said, it really supports your immune system. So however you get it, we had a question about fish oil before. I love sardines, even though they stink and make you very unpopular. If you want people to leave you alone, just open a can of sardines. Very simple. But that's the thing. It's some of the highest concentration of fish oils in mackerel and sardines if you don't want to take pills. It's cheap too. Can of sardines, pretty cheap. It's $1.50, whatever. That's how I'm getting my fats in. And also nuts. I'm a big fan of eating almonds, Brazils, cashews. Pretty much any kind of nut I'm keen on. But for some of you out there, you might be allergic to that. So that's not an option for you. How about yourself, Joe? How do you get fats in your diet?
Look, for me, I really like fat in terms of like what pleases me to eat.
Yes.
But I definitely, compared to say the amount that you eat, I would eat a lot less.
Sure.
And the way I see fats, and I think back to some of the people that I look to for this kind of information. Luke Tulloch is a person who
Genius.
I respect very much.
Shout
in this
out
field.
Luke Tulloch, smart guy.
Yeah,
strong guy.
Check him out. He's got a podcast. He's on the gram.
Luke Tulloch podcast.
Yeah, that's what it is, right? And the guy studied neuroscience, and he's a bodybuilder, so he knows some shit. But he's into training and building muscle, and then applying the science and the academia to that process. Yes. But one thing that always comes through from what I get from him is that he's like, you don't need to, if you have a balanced diet, like you eat most foods and you tend to eat pretty well, you generally don't need to seek extra fats. He's like, there's going to be enough fat in the butter that you put on your toast, in the bit of avocado you have on the side,
sure.
In the olive oil on your salad. He's like, that is more than enough to cover immune function, all those things. Yep. He said, but if you are looking for extra calories, fats are a great source of that. So for me, I tend to just follow whatever fats I have with my meal, and I'm liberal with the amount of butter and with the amount of avo I have. And if I'm putting oil on something, I'm doing the Jamie Oliver, like little drizzle of oil here, guys, and 5 minutes later, you know,
just firing it out.
Yeah. So, you know, so I'm like, there's plenty in there.
Yeah.
And I like them all. I'm actually, strangely, I don't eat a lot of nuts these days. I used to love them.
Yep.
I think when I was very into the paleo thing, I went fucking hard on the nuts and the nut butter.
Yep.
To the point where I now just don't want it.
Too much.
I don't want to fucking see almond butter ever again in my life.
OD'd.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think, yeah, like I said before, guys, the thing is we are putting out there a structure or a framework for you to then go experiment with, right? Like I've been playing with this thing for more than 25 years. So I know definitely what works for me and I know definitely what doesn't. And I also try and, we won't go too deep into it, but I try and eat more seasonally as well. So certain times of the year I will eat, you know, slightly differently to other times of the year, as opposed to just eating the same old thing every single day, which digestively isn't even that good for us. So the other thing which is really good these days, guys, is you can get something like rice bran oil. Like say you like chips or you like frying up your own schnitzel at home or something like that. Rice bran oil is really awesome because it's got like a really high smoking point and it's got long chain fatty triglycerides in it, which are good for you. And yeah, it's really good for you. It's crazy. I mean, we've kind of invented it, we've used it, and frying with it will not make it carcinogenic or terrible or anything. It's a good way for you to access that food without thinking, you know, is this going to give me heart disease?
Take us to protein.
Protein. So the love of my life. Protein, I feel, is overhyped and underrated depending on where you're coming at it. The thing which is hard about protein is just super hard to digest. It's the hardest thing to digest out of all the foods. So depending on where you're getting your protein, and if we break proteins down into amino acids, we've got essential amino acids, kind of non-essential, and then there's one or two little amino acids in there that hang around that could do either job. They are the building blocks of everything in the body. We need it for so many chemical interactions, and our body's chronically breaking it down. If you train jiu-jitsu, you are wrecking your body, wrecking your nervous system, wrecking your muscles. You've got to make sure you're getting enough of it in. And that's actually a pretty hard job to do because it makes, we love to do the work, but we don't like to do the kind of repair stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like we like to just make pour harder, make a mess of our internal system, but then not clean up afterwards.
Yeah.
And eating well helps us with that repair and clean up process, and protein is the key ingredient. Now, depending on where you're coming from, if you're vegetarian, maybe you're not eating meat, you're going to have to work harder to satisfy your protein sources. But there's a lot of good options out there now. You know, you can get soy proteins, you can get pea proteins, but the thing is they're not necessarily as digestible. Whereas if you're a meat eater and you're happy to eat, you know, any kind of meat, eggs, dairy, your job's easier. That's all we're going to come down to. Like, don't take the whole moral, ethical imperative out of it. Eating meat is almost like a cheat. You get so much there. It's just easier. So shout out to you if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you have chosen the harder path, but accept that you can't be lazy. You're going to have to eat more meals. You're going to have to be more organized. You're going to have to get your chickpeas there, get your other sources that are high in protein to make sure that your body's repairing. Otherwise, you start to fall apart.
Yeah, you got to work harder if you're choosing to not eat animal products.
Correct. So you, Joe, when you're trying to get protein in, you did touch on this before. What is your preference go-to?
Man, for me, every morning, eggs of some sort. You know, I like to think that maybe there's a day when I don't have eggs, but I haven't met that day yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like eggs. If I'm feeling like, oh, fuck, I don't want so many eggs, maybe I'll have some cottage cheese or something high in protein, you know, at breakfast with, you know, just 1 or 2 eggs kind of deal.
When I don't feel like eggs,
I
have them on the side.
The funniest is when we're like, oh, I'm fucking sick of bread. Let's go out for breakfast, and we go out on the weekend. And you're like, I'm gonna have something totally different. They're like, what would you like? So you're like, give me the eggs.
Every time.
But eggs for me in the morning, then at lunchtime and dinner time, it's really I'm eating some kind of meat, whether it's, whatever, beef, lamb. I try and vary the protein sources.
Yep.
We put a little bit more effort into it. My partner and I, we buy bulk we buy bulk meat from a couple of different producers that are local to Sydney.
Oh wow!
Where it's farmed in an ethical way,
sustainable.
It's all grass fed. It's all like pasture raised type
Beautiful.
stuff. And you buy it directly from the farm. So you buy a couple $100 worth, but it goes in the freezer, and then we munch on that for a month.
Mad. That's great.
It's really good. I totally harbour some of those. Some of that internal conflict about the ethics of eating meat.
Oh yeah.
And I get that, and it's a decision I choose to go, okay, well, no, I'm going to eat it anyway because I feel it's good for my health.
Yeah.
But I am, like you said before, I respect anyone that decides to take that higher road.
Yeah.
I just think what's really important is that if you are not eating meat purely for a health choice, I think that's treacherous ground. I do think that there has, that documentary, What the Health?
Yes.
Which was very misleading and was really a low quality documentary. And I know people who stopped eating meat because they saw that and it's bad for my health. And it's like, no. They had an agenda in that documentary and and unfortunately it made you think that eating meat was a bad thing. Yeah. There's a case for eating less. There's a case for eating high quality, all those things. But meat has been the procurement of protein has been basically what humans have done since the beginning of time.
But also our evolution, right?
It's like you're hunting to get protein.
Our brains wouldn't be where they are if we didn't consume more protein.
Exactly. And so just the idea that whole food group is bad for you, there's other things that are causing the issues
at play. And here's just an aside. I guess what I would say is this. When people say to you, yeah, you should go vegetarian. I did that. I did that for 12 months. My partner was vegetarian at the time. This is when I was younger. She's also vegan for a sustained period of time. She is a carb-based life form. She tolerates just eating carbohydrates exceptionally well. And she had a natural, very high level of blood iron platelet, her heme iron levels were very high. Mine were not. And actually there's anemia in my family. And that year I basically, even though I wasn't anemic at the time, drove myself into anemia. And I was falling asleep, half crashed in the car.
Which is iron deficiency?
Iron deficiency specifically. The only place you get heme iron is from another animal.
Right.
Non-heme sources are plant derivative. So, even now I have cut back on my meat intake because I'm aware that has the biggest impact on kind of climate change and affecting the world. I'm the same, Joe. It is a conflict, but I try, with any of my choices, I make sure that it's organic or it's locally sourced so that I'm paying a bit more money, but that is better on my conscience that the animal lived a better life.
Yeah.
And that ultimately means better nutrition for me.
That's right.
And so we'll get away from the ethics thing, guys, and talk about how do we look at food and how do we organize a meal that's going to give us the eat to win?
Well, are you familiar with Precision Nutrition?
I am.
I really like their stuff. They're a great nutrition company out there. They do good education for people that want to coach it and, infographics that make it real simple. But they have one that, and if I think about, I don't actually think about this when I'm preparing my meals, but if I reflect my meals, no, it's more if I think about, I'm my meals kind of match that. And a real simple diagram they use is a fistful of carbohydrate, a palm's worth of protein, and then a thumb of fat.
Okay.
So you could say that's rice, that's steak, and then that's avocado. Sure. And then I think they say like a handful of the greens and salad. Yep. And I'm that. For me, if someone's looking for a simple guiding, a place to start, that fucking works. And you do that 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, maybe you don't have the salad and the vegetables at breakfast, but you can put them in at lunch and have double.
Yeah.
But that is just a really simple way to go about figuring out portion sizes.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about it in other podcasts, but we are generally big fans of just eating 3 square meals.
Correct.
That's a great starting point in my opinion.
Definitely. And look, if you're doing something different right now, but for whatever reason, you're doing 5 small or 6 small meals across the day and that suits you, that's good. But if you're skipping breakfast and then trying to tell yourself that you're doing intermittent fasting, you're kind of bullshitting. You know what I mean? Like just skipping breakfast because you're like, oh, I don't have time. You're kind of being lazy there, because it has actually been shown that not eating breakfast lowers your immunity. Now, for some people, it's better. They don't feel like eating when they get up. That's okay. That's not a problem. But if you have a busy lifestyle and, you haven't got time to do anything at lunch and you intend to train jiu-jitsu that night, you want to make sure you got fuel in the tank.
Yeah.
And training jiu-jitsu at night is how the majority of our people train, right? Like I would say that's probably, 60 to 70% of jiu-jitsu people in general. They're very busy during the day. Some people do mornings. If you're lucky, you can sneak in a little cheeky jiu-jitsu sesh at lunch, but most people train nights.
Yeah.
And not that we'll go really hard on it now, but that whole idea of training at night, and I've found it lately because I've been back to training at night, feeling tired and wired and not hungry, even though I will eat, it is harder for me to eat after a heavy jiu-jitsu training session.
Totally.
So you want to make sure that you're getting the bulk of your nutrition in earlier in the day.
Yeah, and it's like, I think if you're the standard person who's like kind of working all day and you're like, oh, I'm going to fast, so I'm going to skip breakfast. And then you find yourself and you're in the office and you're like, oh, I'll go get some lunch, and you get like a ham sandwich and it's, and your third coffee of the day. And then it's like, oh, fuck, it's jiu-jitsu. It's 5 o'clock. Got to get jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And you're jumping on the mats and you've like had a sandwich
Yeah.
and a bunch of caffeine. That is not good nutrition.
No.
And that is also not like, yes, eating less calories is going to help you lose weight, but not in that way, because you are just grossly underfueled. So yeah, I think the fasting thing can be very problematic. If you want to do it, and we've spoken about it, I've used it for cutting weight for leading up to competition very effectively, but I was also hyper structured from like 1 p.m. till like from when I had my first meal to when I went to bed.
Sidebar, I'm not bagging intermittent fasting. It is effective. It's a great way to reduce your caloric intake, whatever, right? The reason why I said what I said is there's so many people out there dressing up poor organization and bad nutritional practices. Oh, bro, I'm just fasting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's what's going on.
Yeah. And yeah, so you have to, like choosing to go vegan or vegetarian, you have to be more disciplined and you have to have more understanding of how this shit works if you choose to use a somewhat complex strategy like fasting.
Sure. So if we look at, because I want to get to kind of preferences in terms of like our take, like the bulletproof take on like most recommended, like most high leverage versus, hey, maybe do less of.
In terms of foods?
Yeah, foods and an approach to why we choose these things. If I'm looking at my best meal, and you were saying like, we're talking different sizes, fist, palm, thumb, etc. My body functions really well on rice. Like if I have rice, stomach is happy. I've an Asian arrangement, like a stir fry, some rice, my body loves that. So like whether it's pre-comp or I've got a really big day, if I know that I have to do a whole bunch of yard work or help my parents out of something, the night before, I will either have a gang of Chinese food or Thai food, and I will eat a large rice to myself. Easy. I might even eat 2. I love it. And I get so much energy from that, and I never get any digestive issues. Whereas for some other people, like my partner, she's Polish, she loves bread. Bread is absolutely her carb of choice, and that works really well for her. How about yourself, man?
Mate, I guess I'll eat any form of carb in that regard, like bread, rice, sweet potato, whatever. But I certainly feel that bread is the lowest quality choice of all of them for me.
Sure.
I know that like I can have I can smash a burger, or I can go and get something from the cafe that's in a bread roll or whatever, and it's not an issue. But if I do that repeatedly over a few days and I'm like, oh fuck, I'm eating a lot of bread here, I do notice I start to get sluggish, and I notice like I start to feel it in my skin.
Sure.
I start to get I get like a little bit of psoriasis, kind of like eczema.
Sure.
And that will flare up.
Yep.
So I find I keep the because you guys got to think about it like this. Rice is a natural product.
Yeah.
Sweet potato comes out of the ground, goes in your face. Potatoes, same thing. bread is made from taking the grain of that grass and then processing the shit out of it.
And adding things.
Yeah, to make this amazing food, right? Like flour is fucking life-changing.
Yeah.
But it is suboptimal when you compare it to like a sweet potato.
Yeah.
Right? Or even rices. So I'm just mindful that it's a substandard choice for me. I try to eat the majority of my bread as sourdough bread.
Yep.
These days. And so I would probably have a piece or two of sourdough most days.
Yep.
And then it's like, rice, sweet potato. And occasionally I eat pasta.
And just on that sourdough piece, guys, what you should know about sourdough is when it's made, basically it's pretty simple. They just add like a scoop of yogurt. So there's good bacteria in there. That's basically what it comes down to.
Well, they add starter culture, which can come from previous bread or,
Yeah, and so that's really helpful in the aiding of digestion. And this is where we can have some allies to help us. And so lots of cultures do it, like pickles, kimchi, sauerkraut.
All fermented foods.
All these things assist with our digestion. And so when we were looking at natural foods, because that's definitely something we ascribe to, is like whole foods, healthy foods, is eating foods that help you. So there's the difference between having an orange and having orange juice, obviously, is the processing involved. I'm not talking about just getting an orange and putting it through a juicer and having the juice without the pulp. I'm talking about orange in a bottle from the supermarket versus eating an orange. That process kills the enzymes in the food itself. And that's the thing. The enzymes help you digest the nutrition that is contained within the food. So that's why we really that's why eating an apple is beneficial, and also the fiber. And this is probably something we haven't quite touched on, but we'll get into next as to like what helps us, maybe what isn't as helpful. Eating vegetables, they got a lot of enzymes, provided you don't cook them too much. Like my grandma, classic. Get those Brussels sprouts.
Boil the fuck out of it.
Boil them till they're grey.
Yeah. All
the green is in the water.
Yeah.
Tip that down the sink. Just eat those grey little nuggets.
Yeah.
And then like mashed potato, just heaps of salt, heaps of butter. Just cook the hell out of it. I mean,
roast lamb, roast that fucking thing for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Dry.
Yeah. Put some mint jelly on it.
Oh yeah.
Just get some sugar.
Now you're talking.
Oh, winning. Anyway, shout out to my grandma, RIP. I love her dearly. But that's the thing, right? That was just cooking at the time. But what we have learnt is eating certain foods raw or fresh or not quite cooked as heavily is better for us.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent, right? I think it's there's other like vegetables. There's ones that are good to cook and there's ones that are good to have raw, isn't there?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're not trying to cook the life out of them. You're just trying to soften them a touch. I mean, yeah, for cruciferous vegetables like cabbages and broccolis and shit, it's important to cook.
Even tomatoes, like lycopene, when you heat tomato to a certain temperature, it actually releases more lycopene.
Oh yeah, tomato sauces and stuff have more of that, don't they?
Yeah, so like, the orange stain that you get, like I don't know if you had this, guys, you've reheated some bolognese or something, and it's not just the fat from the mince. That is lycopene because it's fat soluble. So if you like kind of saute tomatoes roughly and you see that orangey oil, that's the lycopene coming out. And that's like a super valuable nutrient from tomatoes. Just saying.
But look, vegetables for me has been a big one in recent years where I've realized that if I do eat regular servings of vegetables, I just feel better.
Yeah.
And it used to be a bit of an afterthought for me. It was like, what's the protein that I'm cooking? What's the carb? And then I'll throw together a salad and I just try and take a little bit more of a deliberate approach these days so that I get more of it in. Recently with that, I've been moving house. So the kitchen wasn't set up, so we're eating out a lot. We're getting a lot of like delivery stuff.
Sure.
And we're getting like decent stuff. But what I noticed when you're eating out a lot more, you generally have less vegetables.
Yep.
And I started to feel it. I'm like, oh man, and my body starts to crave veggies. And it was like, fuck. I was really excited to get in the kitchen, make a meal, and prepare a fucking huge salad.
Yeah.
And it was almost like as soon as I ate, I'm like, I feel so much better after that.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's been a big focus for me, is trying to get more veggies in, at least 2 meals per day, if not 3.
Awesome. Well, my hack on that is this, guys. I've got a confession to make here. I am not good with green veggies, other than broccoli. I'm good with cooked veggies or colorful vegetables. I love carrots. I love capsicum, Tomatoes are great. You know, I love colorful vegetables. You put a salad in front of me, I'm disappointed. I just don't enjoy it. I will eat it because I know it's good for me, but I just like, oh, salad, far out. I don't engage with it. So what my partner and I have worked on, this is my little workaround, I do green smoothies. So literally it's kale, apple, avocado, maybe some berries in there to sweeten it up, whatever. And you literally just blend the hell out of that and you're having raw vegetables. Now, obviously there's different arguments about the fact I'm not chewing and this, that, this. But what I'd say is I don't chew much anyway. I'm kind of like a duck. Yeah. Just chunk it down, right? So the fact that it's broken down to this minute level actually makes it quite digestible. And I find my energy is significantly higher if I factor in more greens. So, I mean, I'm not being childish about it. And my partner will say this. I'll sit there with a bag of baby spinach and I'll eat a whole chicken and alternate like chicken, baby spinach, chicken, baby spinach. Mainly because I'm lazy and I don't want to make a salad. But I'll eat the baby spinach. But I would say if you have a really good blender, a green smoothie is a really easy way to have a whole bunch of nutrients available, which isn't just some powdered crap. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and that's a good workaround. Like a practical takeaway from that is like, well, if you're not going to eat veggies, maybe it's not the ideal way to do it, to have the smoothie. But if you're not going to eat veggies, it is the ideal way because it's the only thing you're going to do.
Sure.
So it's like, fucking do it, you know? And I think that's really important with nutrition, where it's so easy to find conflicting information that you can be like, oh shit, this thing that I'm doing or not doing is not perfect. I need to do that thing. It's like, no, you need to do what's sustainable for you and what, you know, is more or less like 80% of the way there.
Yep. And it is different for each person. Like I said, I've played with this for a while, so I know it works for me. Joey's been on this for a fair while too. He knows what works for him. If you don't know what works for you, it is important for you to start to explore it. Go, oh, I'm going to try and eat this before training. Nope, didn't work. Oh, I tried this, felt a bit better. And so we can't tell you exactly. We're just going to give you some recommendations for you to try. And maybe if you try something we've recommended and it works for you, come back and let us know. Like, give us that feedback and that can, that's always positive for us to know that we've been able to help you. But the next little thing that I want to kind of bring us closer to the end on is things that possibly we should have less of. Joe got a little bit upset with me a little while back because I said, this is bad. Don't do that. And he was like, you can't say that, bro. I was like, I just did. Stop me. That's what I do. You know, I like to be the polarizing factor. Joe likes to be.
I almost deleted the entire episode.
He got upset.
Could not do that.
Yeah. Okay. But what I think we can agree on is there's some things which aren't as helpful.
Yes.
Sure.
Well, what would tell them what I said? What did you say?
I said processed sugar is bad.
Yeah.
And Joe was like, no, there's a use for everything.
Yes.
I was like, stop being so moderate. I'm trying to create sensationalism here so we can get some traction, son.
Soundbite, bitch.
Blow up on the internet. But
the thinking there is it was a good conversation. JT is like, well, for most of the people that we're talking to, we want them to eat healthily, and most people have too much sugar in their diet. Yeah. So I'm going to say sugar's bad because for them it is.
I said processed sugar.
Processed sugar, right?
Right. I'm not saying fruit.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't eat carbohydrates. I eat lots of it. But for example, and this is something
let me just finish the breakdown first. Whereas for me, I'm like, well, no, because everything can have a place. And as an example, depending on what your goals are, if you're trying to put on mass or something, maybe processed sugar could play a role for you. So
it can.
Right? And so, but obviously that's not speaking to the majority of folks who are hearing this right now. So it's just a perspective piece.
Yeah. And to be honest, man, I'm an obese man stuck in a slightly fit man's body. I can eat a bag of chips and a whole bag of snakes like anyone's business. Is that what you should do? No. So what can help? What I have found with different pieces of advice over time, because people always take things to the extreme, is we want to make sure that people are satisfying the basics. So we're doing the 3 square meals and trying to get enough of each thing. Sometimes where people can go wrong is trying to like max out on supplements. And at the end of the day, look at the title, supplementary. It's for if you're missing something. And a lot of the time, we really feel like inadequate. A lot of media and advertising is making us feel like, you're not strong enough, you're not jacked enough, you're not anything enough. And they do this by going, we have the answer. This product will make you better. And that's not necessarily the case. So we did have a question about multivitamins before. Like, does this multivitamin work? And it's really, you've got to actually have a closer look at yourself to know if you need it. Because maybe you're doing really well right now. Even though you feel flat, it could be a lot of other contributing factors. You don't know till you get a blood test if you're iron deficient. You shouldn't, your mate goes, hey man, you need to get more iron.
I've started eating more iron. I feel awesome.
I feel great. Well, you should do it. And it's like you actually need
You're a different person.
You need to understand what's going on with you first.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing too is with supplements is that they can distract you from addressing what you're already doing. It's like, well, you're already eating every day. So maybe the low-hanging fruit is looking at what you are already eating and what your habits are around food currently that perhaps you could adjust instead of adding something new.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, well, okay, maybe you don't eat enough vegetables. Start there.
Yep.
Maybe you're not hydrated enough. Okay, get hydrated. Make drinking like more water a habit of yours. Maybe you eat like a lot of processed food. So then you listen to this and you're like, okay, fuck, you know what? I'm going to stop eating the shit that I cook from the microwave and I'm going to make my own food. Yep. Maybe it's I buy the cheap fucking bulk pack of family sausages. That's my protein. It's like, all right, maybe I'm going to stop buying that. I'm going to buy some organic chicken thigh or something. Like,
sure.
Addressing that stuff is easier and it's higher percentage because you're doing it every single day, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I think we would both say that then once you've sort of exhausted that realm, then it's like, all right, well, if you're still feeling a bit flat and your sleep's great and you're doing all the right things in terms of eating, great, check out some supplements or go see the doctor and get a blood test.
Definitely. Like I said this before, I have a friend, good friend of mine, Paulie, and he's an artist. He lives a rock star lifestyle. He's kind of dialed it in recently. He started doing the things we're talking about, eating better. But he was partying a lot, staying out real late, a few recreational bits and pieces, substances, whatever. He couldn't put on weight. He really wanted to put on weight. And he said, hey, man, is there any like good steroids? And I was like, how about get a good night's sleep? Yeah, that's sweet. But like, are there any good steroids, like healthy? I was like, bro, get your sleep on. Like, regulating your hormones is so much related to getting a good night's sleep. And almost none of us can do that. So even though we're prepared to pay money for powders and just ingest things that taste like crap and just do all this stuff in the name of being healthier, we're not prepared to do something which is simpler, but maybe more confronting because it makes us go, I'm living unhealthily. Yeah. The pill and powder won't solve the problem.
Yeah, that's right. It feels like it's like a silver bullet.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I'll buy that because it's going to help.
Yeah.
No, I just need to sleep more.
Yeah, true. So circling back around on the eat to win lifestyle, Joe, if we could give people a bit of a kind of summary takeaway as to how they can start to #blessed, #eat to win.
#eat to win lifestyle.
How would you approach that?
All right. The big takeaways for me from that episode are 3 square meals per day, right? And this is a general recommendation, 3 square meals per day. And then let's talk about portion sizes. So we're saying fistful of carbohydrate, palmful of protein, thumbful of fat, right? Third takeaway for me is the seasonal piece. So you go to the supermarket, try and go to a reasonable supermarket. Avocados are cheap. Okay, they're probably in season. Great. When you go to the supermarket and avocados are $10 a piece, don't fucking buy them because that tells you they're not in season, which means they're likely imported or they're likely been like preserved somehow and they're going to be lacking in nutrients anyway. So buy what's cheap from the soup, buy what's in abundance, and that is usually a pretty good way to eat seasonal. Further to that, I would say have good sources for your groceries. So if you're like, well, I buy meat every week, go to a good butcher or find a good place online where you can access good quality stuff at a cheaper price. Because otherwise you're just putting your health into the hands of the local supermarket, which probably don't stock the best stuff, and you are going to be paying premium dollar for it as well.
Correct.
Extra takeaways for you?
Look, I feel the thing about all of this information is if you're not actually putting some time aside and thinking of this as an experiment, in the sense that trying to understand what works for you and what doesn't work for you, you could be doing so many different things and have them not work for you because you're doing it blindly. You're not actually doing it with some direction.
Yeah.
So don't try and change everything at once. That's what I would say. Start with one thing first, whether that is hydration, or that's I'm going to eat a bit more carbohydrate, or whatever it is that you feel, because we all deep down know if we're eating well.
Yeah.
Like we kind of know if we're smashing too much Uber Eats or kind of snacking on chocolate when we could have something else, but we do it because it's convenient. Take that out of it. Pick one thing that you're going to change and do it consistently. And once you've done that and you feel it makes a difference, cool. But if you change that and you feel like it's not making a difference, that's okay. Go to work on something else. But be consistent with it for a period of time. Because I feel like just doing it for one day or just doing it for a week isn't enough. You need at least a good solid month to feel that out.
Yeah, for food-related stuff, it seems like say you want to try and go, I'm going to cut dairy and see how I feel.
Yep.
You got to cut it for like 3 months to for your body to actually get to a point where there's none of it present in there, and whatever, maybe side effects of your allergic response to it have gone.
Sure.
You got to give it time. But more importantly is developing these habits. You got to give things a good couple of weeks at least, don't you? So yeah, don't rush it. Man, it's a lifelong experiment. The way I see it is we're all eating food every day.
Yep.
Forever. Like you're married to it, whether you like it or not. So you might as well play around in a mindful way to try and find out what is optimal for you.
Yeah. And then, and just checking in on your BJJ. Energy doesn't lie. If your energy is improving, you're feeling good, that is the undeniable truth of it. If your energy is not good, even though you might be doing all the right things, you need to reconsider your approach.
Energy and body composition, right?
Oh, true.
And I'd say like it's not like, I don't believe that everybody should have a six pack. I don't subscribe to that idea. However, I do think that if you are noticing, I'm putting on fat around my belly, or I seem to be not shifting this weight, that is an indication that something is out of whack, either with your sleep or your nutrition.
Yep.
So that's just a really simple way to look at it. And if you're like training and eating well and you're like, my body fat's kind of dropping away, or I'm feeling pretty good, that's a good sign.
Definitely. All right, mate, I think we'll leave it there.
That's a big one. Thank you, guys.
Appreciate you guys. Peace.